Welcome back, and thank you for tuning in to HK Cheating Stories. We appreciate each and every one of you joining us. Where in the world are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's get the story started. I'm Rebecca, and 8 months ago, I married the love of my life. But there was one thing missing from my big day: my parents. They didn't show up. Not only did they skip my wedding, but their absence made me realize a painful truth about my family. Let me tell you why. It's strange how things can hit you all at once. I always thought my wedding day would be filled with joy and love, surrounded by everyone who cared about me. But that morning, as I slipped in my dress and looked at myself in the mirror, I felt a weight in my chest. The excitement was there, of course, but something was missing. As I stood in the garden, waiting to walk down the aisle, I couldn't help but notice how different this wedding felt from the ones I'd always imagined. There were plenty of guests, all of them smiling, chatting, and celebrating. My husband Mark stood beside me, his eyes full of love and pride, and yet a knot in my stomach tightened. My parents weren't here. Neither was my sister, Mullen. It wasn't that I hadn't expected this. Part of me had been preparing for their absence for a while now, but still hurt, more than I cared to admit. The fact that they chose not to attend my wedding, to skip out on what should have been one of the happiest days of my life, stung more than I ever thought possible. And it wasn't even just their absence that troubled me. It was the fact that they weren't even trying to hide it. I had tried everything. I had sent them invitations, both digital and physical, and I had made sure they knew the wedding details well in advance. Still, they didn't respond. I texted, called, and even emailed them multiple times, but each message was met with silence or vague excuses about being too busy. When the day came, I kept waiting for them to show up, but nothing. Just the empty seats at the front row, where they should have been. It's not like I was entirely surprised. My relationship with my family, especially with my sister, has always been strained. We've never really gotten along, not the way sisters are supposed to. But even though I've grown used to it, the absence of my parents on my wedding day still felt like a slap in the face. How could they miss this? How could they not want to be there for me? When I talked to them afterward, trying to understand why they hadn't come, they claimed that they hadn't received the invitations. I knew that was a lie. I had confirmation receipts for both the digital invites and the physical ones. They just didn't want to admit it. I wasn't sure what hurt more, the fact that they skipped my wedding or the fact that they tried to gaslight me into believing it was my fault for not inviting them properly. "Why didn't you invite us?" my mother had asked, as if she didn't know the answer. Her tone was accusatory, like I was the one who had done something wrong. I was stunned for a moment, my mind racing. Was she really trying to make me feel guilty for something she was clearly responsible for? I didn't have the energy to argue. I simply apologized, pretending I was the one who had made the mistake. I just couldn't deal with it anymore. They always turned things around, making me feel like I was the one in the wrong, and I was so tired of it. I didn't confront them about their attempts to twist the truth, not this time. It wasn't worth it. The worst part of it all was that I had spent my entire life trying to earn their approval, but nothing was ever good enough. And now, on the one day that should have been all about me, they weren't even willing to show up. I kept telling myself I didn't need their validation. I had Mark. I had my friends, my in-laws, and most importantly, I had finally learned to stop measuring my worth by their standards. But that didn't make the pain go away. It just made it bearable. I looked around at the people who were there to support me. They made my wedding day beautiful, even without my family. The ceremony itself was perfect, simple, heartfelt, and full of love. Mark looked at me the way I always dreamed someone would, like I was everything. But in the back of my mind, the absence of my family gnawed at me. I tried to ignore it, to focus on the joy in front of me, but it was hard not to feel the ache of missing them, especially when they should have been there. I couldn't help but wonder, though, was this how it would always be? Would I always be the second daughter? Would I always come second to Mullen? As the evening wore on, I tried to push the thought aside, but the emptiness in my heart remained. And so did the realization my family was never going to change, and neither was my place in it. Growing up, I always knew that I would never be able to measure up to Mullen. From the moment she could walk, it was like the world simply handed her everything she needed to succeed. I still remember the first time I realized just how different we were. It was in elementary school, during a spelling bee competition. I was confident, maybe a little too cocky, and I thought for sure I had it in the bag. But then Mullen stood up, effortlessly spelling every word without even breaking a sweat. And there I was, stammering on the easiest words. That was the first taste of what it felt like to be constantly overshadowed by her. She was always the center of attention, always the star of the show. In class, teachers would give her special treatment, always calling on her first, always praising her work. At home, she was the one who had the latest achievements to flaunt. She was always perfect. She won every science fair, every talent show, and when it came to high school, she was the prom queen, class president, and valedictorian. Everyone loved her. Even my parents couldn't seem to stop talking about her. And me? I was just there. It didn't help that she was beautiful, too. Tall, slender, with perfect hair and a smile that could light up a room. She pursued modeling during college, and, of course, she landed a job almost immediately. Our house was filled with photos of her, framed and hung on the walls like some kind of shrine to her beauty. I remember when she got her first professional headshot. My parents threw a huge party to celebrate, inviting all our relatives and her friends. That same year, I graduated with a degree in computer science, a major I had chosen because it made sense for me. I wasn't glamorous or flashy, but I was smart. But no one cared about my accomplishments. My mother hardly acknowledged my graduation, only muttering a quick, "well done," before turning back to Mullen's latest photo session. It was like I didn't exist in their eyes. The constant comparisons were exhausting. I didn't have the looks to be a model, and I certainly didn't have the charisma to be a social butterfly like Mullen. I wasn't the one everyone turned to for approval, and that became painfully clear when it came to my career. Mullen climbed the corporate ladder effortlessly, landing a senior executive position by the age of 30. She had a corner office, a corporate car, everything you could ever want. Me? I worked as a mid-level software developer, and while I was proud of my work, it was never something my parents could brag about to their friends and relatives. But what hurt the most was the way my mother treated me growing up. She never seemed to think I was good enough. I wasn't pretty enough, or skinny enough, or successful enough. I remember when I was a teenager, she signed me up for all kinds of workout classes, always saying, "Mullen never struggles with her weight. If you just put in a little more effort, you could look like her." It was like I wasn't allowed to have my own identity, my own body. Even when I tried to tell her that I was happy with who I was, it never seemed to matter. It was always about Mullen. By the time I reached my mid-20s, I had stopped trying to impress my parents. It became clear that no matter what I did, it would never be enough. So, I decided to focus on my own life. I found a job that I enjoyed, formed friendships with people who respected me for who I was, not for who they thought I should be. It was a relief, in a way. I stopped chasing their approval, and for the first time, I felt like I was living on my own terms. But the damage had already been done. It didn't matter that I had grown professionally or emotionally. The bond one longed for with my parents was never going to happen. And so, I kept my interactions with them surface level. At Christmas dinners and family gatherings, I smiled, nodded, and tried to ignore the fact that they were always raving about Mullen. Her latest job, her new boyfriend, her exotic vacation. Those were the conversations that mattered to them. I played along, letting the distance between us grow wider and wider, but inside, I was dying. I thought I had accepted it. I thought I had come to terms with the fact that my parents would never see me as enough. But deep down, I always hoped that maybe, just maybe, one day they would realize how hard I tried, how much I had sacrificed to live up to their expectations. Of course, that day never came. Instead, they continued to idolize Mullen, and I was left in the shadows. It wasn't until I met Mark that I realized how little I had truly been seen by anyone, especially my family. Mark noticed me. He saw who I was beyond the surface, beyond the comparison to Mullen. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel invisible. But as happy as I was with him, I couldn't help but wonder, would he too eventually start seeing me the way my parents did? Or would he eventually compare me to someone else, just like they had done all my life? That question lingered in my mind, but I couldn't let it ruin what I had with Mark. For once, I had someone who saw me, who loved me for exactly who I was. Maybe that was enough. But I had to face the truth. In my parents' eyes, I would always be second to Mullen. As I sit here, reflecting on my wedding day and everything that led up to it, I can't help but think back to all the times I tried, desperately tried, to earn my parents' approval. I spent years chasing after something I would never get, always trying to prove myself worthy, always fighting to be seen. It didn't matter how much I achieved, how hard I worked, it was never enough. And it's not like I hadn't tried. No, I had tried everything I could think of to finally be recognized. When I was younger, I did everything by the book. I enrolled in the classes my mother recommended, joined clubs she thought would build character, and even tried modeling for a short time, just to see if maybe I could fill the role my mother seemed to think was the only one worth having. But no matter what I did, it never measured up to Mullen's effortless brilliance. I would never be tall enough, thin enough, or outgoing enough to stand at her shadow. I remember the first time I tried modeling. I was in high school, and Mullen had just landed her first professional photo shoot. The family was buzzing with excitement. My mother was thrilled, and my father was almost glowing with pride. It wasn't even my achievement, but it felt like the entire family had rallied behind it. They all chipped in for the extravagant party to celebrate her big break. Meanwhile, I sat quietly in the corner, wondering when someone would acknowledge the fact that I had just finished a difficult year of advanced classes, or the fact that I had gotten into a solid university to study computer science. The worst part wasn't the party, though. It was when I went home afterward and announced that I had been accepted into a prestigious computer science program. My parents hardly reacted. My mother's response was a simple, "That's nice, dear," and she immediately turned back to discussing Mullen's latest modeling gig. I try not to show how much it stung, but inside I was crushed. It wasn't that I didn't want my sister to succeed. It's just that no matter what I did, it felt like I was invisible, as if my accomplishments were just background noise to her perfect life. And it wasn't just my mother. My father was the same. He was proud of me in his own quiet way. But it was never the same kind of pride he had for Mullen. I wasn't the one he showed off to friends or bragged about at family dinners. When I graduated, I remember him simply nodding and saying, "Good job, kid," before launching into a story about Mullen's latest victory at some modeling competition. That was the moment I knew. No matter what I did, I would never be the child they were proud of in the way they were proud of Mullen. But I didn't let it stop me. I was stubborn, and I thought if I just kept pushing, if I just kept doing my best, one day they'd see me for who I was. That I wasn't just the second daughter, the one who wasn't as pretty or as successful. That my accomplishments mattered too. But it never happened. I went on to build a solid career in tech, working as a software developer at a respectable company. I was good at what I did. I enjoyed my work. But I knew deep down that my parents would never share my excitement or boast about me the way they did with Mullen. It was frustrating. For years, I would talk to them about my projects, about the advancements I was making in my career, but it always felt like talking to a brick wall. They'd nod politely, then ask, "How's Mullen doing?" It's like my entire existence had been reduced to a footnote in the story of Mullen's life. Even when I stopped trying to impress them, I couldn't escape the comparisons. At family gatherings, it was always the same routine. Mullen's latest achievement would be the topic of conversation, while I was left to quietly sip my drink and nod along. My parents were so enamored with her that they didn't even notice the emotional distance I had put between us. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that I didn't need their approval anymore. But the truth is, it did matter. It hurt more than I was willing to admit. Even as an adult, I still craved their recognition, the kind they so freely gave to Mullen. And that's when I realized the truth. I would never be enough for them. No matter how hard I tried, how successful I became, I would always be in Mullen's shadow. I had accepted that, or at least I thought I had. But then, everything changed when I met Mark. He wasn't like my parents. He didn't see me through the lens of comparison or expectation. He saw me for who I truly was, my strengths, my flaws, and everything in between. For the first time in my life, someone saw me, and that made all the difference. But deep down, I still wondered, would Mark one day start comparing me to Mullen too? Would he eventually find me lacking? But then again, maybe that was just the fear talking. Maybe it was time to stop comparing myself to Mullen and start living for myself. For the first time in years, I felt like I could do that. I never expected my parents to be thrilled when I told them I was engaged, but I also didn't expect the icy response that followed. I had spent years bracing myself for their indifference, but even I wasn't prepared for how emotionally distant they were when the news came out. It was like telling them I had won the lottery, only to be met with a yawn. I remember the day clearly. Mark and I had been together for 4 years, and after countless conversations, we decided it was time to take the plunge. We weren't rushing it. We both knew this was right. Mark wasn't perfect, but he was perfect for me. He saw me, the real me, not the version of myself I'd spent my whole life trying to be in order to gain my parents' approval. It was a quiet evening at home when I called my parents to share the news. I expected some excitement, some joy, maybe even a little celebration. I had always dreamed of hearing my parents tell me how happy they were for me, how proud they were that I'd found someone who truly made me happy. But instead, there was a long, uncomfortable silence on the other end of the line. My mother was the first to speak, and her words hit me like a slap. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice full of hesitation. "Maybe you should think it over. Lose a little weight before the wedding. It wouldn't hurt to be more presentable." I felt my heart sink. I had hoped that, after all these years, they had finally come to see me for who I was, not some project to be fixed or improved. But no, there was again the same old refrain. "You're not good enough unless you change." My father barely said anything at all. It was as if he had checked out of the conversation completely. And I realized, right then and there, that their reaction wasn't about me at all. It was about them, about their image, about their perfect little family that they were so determined to maintain. The thought that I, the second daughter, might be getting married before Mullen had clearly unsettled them. I hung up the phone, feeling more deflated than I had in years. The excitement I had felt just hours earlier was gone, replaced by a growing sense of disappointment. I turned to Mark, who had been quietly listening in the background. He was puzzled, too, by their coldness, but he didn't show it. "Are they always like this?" he asked softly. "Pretty much," I replied with a hollow laugh. "They don't know how to love me for who I am. They only love the version of me they think I should be." It wasn't until later, during the engagement party, that the full weight of their indifference really hit me. Mark and I had invited our closest friends and family, hoping to celebrate together. But my parents were distant. They didn't even acknowledge the engagement in a meaningful way. They sat off in a corner, whispering among themselves, eyes glued to my mother's phone. I couldn't help but wonder what they were talking about. Was it Mullen? Were they comparing her achievements to mine once again? Were they secretly furious that their perfect daughter hadn't gotten engaged first? Mark noticed, too. He leaned in close, whispering, "Did you hear that?" I looked up, and for the first time, he pointed out something I hadn't fully understood in the moment. They had been talking to Mullen on the phone. The tension in the room was palpable, and I suddenly felt like I was living in some twisted version of a reality show where I was constantly being judged, constantly under surveillance. I couldn't take it. I had to walk away. Later that evening, when I asked my mother about their behavior, she just shrugged it off. "We were just busy, dear," she said, but I could see the guilt in her eyes. She couldn't even lie to me without giving herself away. I could feel the judgment radiating from her, the silent message she was sending. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. The story of our family was supposed to center around Mullen, the perfect daughter, the one who always got everything right. Not me, never me. But there I was, the second daughter, who had dared to step out of line by getting married first. And their coldness, their refusal to even pretend to be happy for me, spoke volumes. I thought I had come to terms with my place in this family. I thought I had accepted the fact that I would always be a background character in the story of Mullen's life. But this was different. This was real. This was proof, more than anything else, that no matter what I did, I would never be enough for them. It wasn't just that they didn't care about my wedding. It was that they didn't care about me. Not truly. Not in the way I'd always longed for. And as much as I tried to convince myself that I didn't need their approval, the truth was it hurt more than I could put into words. For the first time, I was starting to see my family for what they truly were, a facade built on expectations and appearances with no room for anyone who didn't fit their perfect little mold. And I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep pretending that everything was fine. The day of my wedding came, and I had to keep reminding myself that it wasn't about them. It wasn't about my parents or my sister. This day, this moment, was for me and Mark. But as I stood there, my heart heavy with an invisible weight, I couldn't shake the feeling of loss, of betrayal. I looked out into the crowd, at all the familiar faces, all the people who were there to celebrate our love, and my eyes scanned the front row for the two faces that should have been there, my parents. But there was no sign of them, not a trace. The ceremony went on as planned, beautiful and intimate. The garden was perfect, lush green, bathed in the soft glow of the afternoon sun. I felt like I was floating through it all, and for a moment, I was able to push the emptiness in my chest aside. Mark stood at the altar, smiling at me, his eyes warm and full of love. As I walked toward him, every step felt like a small victory. I was marrying the man who saw me, the man who loved me for exactly who I was. But in the back of my mind, the absence of my family gnawed at me like a constant, uninvited guest. They weren't there. They weren't there to witness me take this step, to see me walk into a new chapter of my life with the man I had chosen. And that hurt more than I was willing to admit. The vows were exchanged, and Mark squeezed my hand. He kept whispering to me, reminding me that this day was about us. His words helped, but they didn't erase the pain. The first dance came, and I swirled around the dance floor in his arms, trying to focus on the joy of the moment. But I couldn't help but glance at the empty seats in the front row. The ones where my parents should have been. My mother should have been there, holding back tears, watching me start my new life. But she wasn't. I felt the sting of their absence like a physical ache deep in my chest. The front row remained vacant throughout the ceremony, a cruel reminder of the distance they had placed between us, even on the most important day of my life. When the music ended, I felt hollow inside. Everyone clapped, and I smiled, but it was forced. The happiness I had fought for felt like it was slipping through my fingers like sand. The reception wasn't much better. There was laughter, there was dancing, and there was love all around, but the absence of my family loomed over everything. I tried to enjoy myself, to savor the moments, but it wasn't the same without them. It was supposed to be a celebration, a union of families, but it felt like I was missing a piece of myself. Mark's family, his parents, his siblings, had been amazing. They treated me like their own daughter, like I was part of their family from the moment I met them. They helped with everything from the seating arrangements to the floral decorations. It was a kind of support I had never experienced with my own parents. But despite the love I felt from them, there was a part of me that couldn't ignore the hole in my heart, the part that wanted my parents to be there. To be there, truly present, to celebrate my happiness. But they weren't. And then came the moment I had been dreading, the father-daughter dance. As the DJ called for all fathers and daughters to take the floor, I stood there, frozen. I scanned the crowd, but I didn't see my father. I didn't see anyone who could fill that role. The emptiness hit me like a wave, and I had to force back the tears that were threatening to spill over. I knew that if I let myself cry, it would open up all the wounds I'd been trying to ignore for years. It wasn't just about the dance. It was the fact that, in that moment, I realized that no matter how much I had hoped, no matter how many times I had wished things would be different, my parents were never going to be the people I needed them to be. They had chosen not to show up for me when it mattered most. After the honeymoon, I tried to reach out to them. I called, I texted, I even sent an email. I wanted answers. I needed closure. But every attempt was met with excuses, lies, and evasions. My mother told me that they were too busy and didn't get the invitation. That was the story they had concocted. But I knew better. I had the confirmation receipts. I had sent them everything they needed to be there. It was clear now. My parents weren't coming to my wedding because, in their eyes, I wasn't the daughter who deserved that kind of celebration. I wasn't their perfect girl, the one they had always held up on a pedestal. And as much as I hated to admit it, I finally accepted that. Their absence at my wedding was no longer just about the wedding day. It was about everything that had come before. It was the culmination of years of emotional neglect, of being second place in a race I never stood a chance of winning. I thought I had prepared myself for this, But no amount of preparation could have shielded me from the pain of their rejection. I'd always known they favored Mullen, but now it was undeniable. Their absence, their indifference, it was a final confirmation that no matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, I would never be the daughter they wanted me to be. The days following the wedding felt like a haze. I had just married the love of my life, surrounded by friends and people who truly cared about me. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. My parents, who should have been there to witness the beginning of a new chapter in my life, were still nowhere to be found. Their absence loomed over me like a cloud, casting a shadow over what should have been the happiest time of my life. A week passed before I finally gathered the courage to reach out to them. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but I needed answers. I needed to understand why they had chosen not to show up. They were my parents, after all. This wasn't just any event. It was my wedding, a moment I had hoped would bring us closer. But instead, it had driven a deeper wedge between us. I called my mother first. The phone rang a few times before she picked up, her voice cool and detached as usual. "Hello," she said, as if it were just another regular conversation, not the one I'd been dreading. "Mom, we need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. "About the wedding. Why didn't you come?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "We didn't receive your invitation," she said flatly, as though that was the end of the matter. I wasn't buying it. I had sent them both physical and digital invitations. I had double-checked everything. "I know you did," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "I even have the delivery confirmations. You received it. Why didn't you show up?" For a moment, there was nothing but silence. I could almost hear her stewing over her next words. And then she finally spoke, her voice slightly strained. "You know how busy we are? We didn't have time to come." I didn't know how to respond. The wedding was a once-in-a-lifetime event, something that would never come around again. And they couldn't make time? The words felt like a slap in the face, and I could feel my anger rising. But I swallowed it down, not wanting to escalate the situation more than it already had been. "Mom," I said, trying to keep the hurt from bleeding through my words. "You were there for Mullen. You always show up for her. But for me, nothing. What am I supposed to think about that?" There was another long pause. "You're overreacting," she finally said, her voice colder than before. "It wasn't that big of a deal. We didn't think it was necessary." "It wasn't necessary?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You didn't think my wedding was necessary?" My voice cracked before I could stop it. "You didn't think I was worth showing up for?" She didn't respond immediately. Instead, I heard her shifting around, probably trying to figure out how to deflect the blame. And then, like clockwork, she dropped the bomb. "We never expected you to get married before Mullen. This wasn't how it was supposed to go." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had always suspected it, always feared that my parents saw Mullen as the golden child, but hearing it out loud, hearing them admit it, was a different kind of betrayal. It was like everything I had ever done, every attempt I'd made to be seen, to be acknowledged, didn't matter. I was never going to be the daughter they wanted. I was never going to be enough. "You've got to be kidding me," I managed to say through gritted teeth. "This isn't about Mullen. This is about me. And you couldn't even show up for me on my wedding day because it wasn't in the order you wanted?" There was a tense silence on the other end of the line before my mother spoke again, this time with a bitterness I had never heard before. "You've always been jealous of Mullen. We know it, and you know it. You always wanted to be her. But you never could be, could you?" The words stung more than anything she had said before. I could feel the anger rising in my chest, but there was something deeper, something more painful than just anger, this deep, gnawing sense of loss. I was still that little girl, always trying to prove I was good enough, always failing to meet their expectations. And now, even as an adult, nothing had changed. "I'm not jealous of her," I said, my voice trembling with the weight of everything I had been holding inside. "I'm tired of being compared to her. I've spent my whole life trying to be something I'm not, just to get you to notice me. But I can't keep doing this anymore. I'm done." There was another silence on the phone, longer this time. My mother didn't say anything at all, and I realized I was done too. I didn't need their approval. Not anymore. I didn't need their validation, their constant comparisons to Mullen. I had finally accepted the painful truth. I was never going to be the daughter they wanted me to be. I took a deep breath and said, "I'm sorry for everything, but I'm done trying to please you." And with that, I hung up the phone. I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me, though the pain was still there, lingering. It wasn't the closure I had hoped for, but it was the closure I needed. For the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe again. And as much as it hurt to admit, I knew that walking away from this toxic dynamic was the only way I could truly move forward. Just when I thought I had finally started to let go, Mullen showed up. And by showed up, I don't mean physically. No, that would have been too direct. Instead, she did what she always did best. She manipulated the situation in her own way, just like she had done since we were kids. But this time, I wasn't going to let her get away with it. It started with a text, a message that was just too perfect, too polished, like it had been rehearsed 1,000 times before. I had blocked her number after the wedding fiasco. I didn't want to deal with her passive-aggressive nonsense anymore. But of course, that didn't stop her. She knew exactly how to push my buttons. I was at work when I received it. My phone buzzed on my desk, and I saw her name pop up. My stomach churned, but I opened the message anyway, curious about what new form of manipulation she had planned this time. The text read, "Rebecca, I've been thinking about our family and all the recent drama. You know, our parents have done so much for us over the years. They've supported us in every way they could. And I understand that you're upset about the wedding, but I think you should really reconsider how you've been treating them. They've always tried their best. You can't just blame them for everything that's gone wrong in your life." I could feel my blood start to boil as I read the words. The gall, the nerve, the audacity. She was pretending to be the voice of reason, while all I could see was the same Mullen who had always made me feel inferior, the same Mullen who had spent her life overshadowing me. I responded, not with words of anger, but with cold, calculated precision. "Mullen, don't pretend to care about what's happened. You've never cared about me, not truly. You've always wanted to control the narrative, and I'm done with that. This isn't about family drama. This is about you getting your way and making me look bad." Almost immediately, her response came through, and I could practically hear her smug smile in the text. "Rebecca, I'm just trying to help. You know I care about you. You've always been so sensitive, and I understand how hard it must be for you to deal with things like this. But you have to realize that life isn't about being the victim. It's about understanding the bigger picture. Maybe Mark doesn't understand this, but I'm sure he'll come around. After all, you need to think about the future." I felt my fists clench at my sides. She was doing it again, wasn't she? She was trying to manipulate me by using Mark against me. The worst part? She knew exactly how to do it. She knew that her words would worm their way into my mind and make me doubt myself. But not this time. Not anymore. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I couldn't let her break me like this. So, I responded, carefully choosing my words. "Mullen, I'm not the problem. And Mark doesn't need you to tell him what's best for me. I'm not the insecure little girl I used to be. You can't control me anymore. Not with your guilt trips, not with your manipulation." I hit send and immediately felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't the kind of victory I wanted, but it was a victory nonetheless. And I knew that Mullen wasn't going to back down easily. She never had. But I was done being her pawn. I was done playing her game. Not long after, I received another message. This time it was from Mark. He was laughing so hard he could barely get the words out. "You won't believe this," he said, his voice shaking with amusement. "Mullen just messaged me. You have to read this." I wasn't sure what to expect, but what I got was classic Mullen. She had gone behind my back and messaged him, trying to convince him that I was in the wrong. Her tone was so condescending, so laced with the same superiority she had always worn like armor. It was almost laughable, if it weren't so infuriating. In her message to Mark, she had said, "As someone who truly cares about Rebecca, I feel it's my responsibility to help her see reason. She's always been so insecure, so sensitive. She just doesn't understand the bigger picture. I know it might be hard for you to see, but you have to help her realize that her actions are damaging to our family. You wouldn't want to be caught in the middle of all this, would you?" I couldn't believe it. She had tried to use him, just like she had tried to use me for all those years. But Mark wasn't like the rest of them. He wasn't going to fall for her manipulations. When I got home that night, we went over the text together, laughing at how absurd they were. She really thinks she can control me, doesn't she? I said, feeling a sense of relief that I hadn't let her get to me this time. Mark smiled, squeezing my hand. She really doesn't know me at all. That was the moment I realized something crucial. Mullen wasn't the all-powerful figure she thought she was. She wasn't the perfect sister, the perfect daughter, the perfect everything. She was just a person, and for the first time, I saw through her facade. And as liberating as it was also heartbreaking. She had spent her entire life trying to control everything around her, and I wasn't sure if she even realized how much damage she was causing. But I wasn't going to let her break me anymore. This time I was done. Done with the manipulation, done with the guilt trips, and done with the emotional games. I wasn't going to let her control the narrative any longer. I had finally learned to stand up for myself, and for the first time in my life, I was free from her grasp. And no matter what happened next, I knew I was strong enough to handle it. I had spent so many years trying to keep the peace, trying to be the daughter my parents wanted me to be, try to fit into their image of a perfect family. But that was before I realized something crucial. Nothing I did, no matter how hard I tried, would ever be enough for them. Not for my mother, who had always placed Mullen on a pedestal. Not for my father, who seemed content to let the favoritism continue. And certainly not for my sister, who had spent her life making sure I always came second. After everything that had happened, the wedding, the absence, Mullen's manipulation, and the lies my parents had told me, I knew it was time. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. I had to confront them, once and for all. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was something I needed to do for myself. It was the only way I could move forward, knowing I'd said everything I needed to say. The phone call came a few days later. I had finally worked up the courage, and I knew that this time I wasn't going to back down. My parents' number popped up on my screen, and I hesitated for a moment. I was nervous, yes, but this was it. I was done being the second choice. I answered. "Hello," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, but I could hear the edge of anger in it. "Rebecca," my mother said, her voice tight, almost as if she knew what was coming. "We need to talk." I felt a lump form in my throat. "Yes, we do." She sighed heavily. "I'm sure you've heard all the gossip by now. Your wedding, your drama, everything. I'm so disappointed in how things have gone. This isn't how we raised you." I felt the sting of her words, but I swallowed it down. "No, this isn't how you raised me. This is how you raised Mullen. You always made it clear that I would never be enough. And I'm tired of pretending I don't see it." There was silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment I wondered if I had gone too far. But then my mother spoke again, her voice icy. "You're still holding on to the past, Rebecca. That's the problem. You can't let go of your jealousy. You've always been envious of Mullen, and now you're trying to tear everything down because of it." I felt a fire ignite within me. I had heard this accusation 1,000 times before, but this time it didn't hurt. It pissed me off. "I'm not jealous of Mullen," I said, my voice steady. "I'm tired of being compared to her. I'm tired of being told that nothing I do will ever be as good as what she does. I've spent my entire life trying to make you proud, trying to make you see me. But you never have. You only see her. You've always seen her. Don't be ridiculous, Rebecca," my mother snapped. "We love you both equally." "No, you don't," I said firmly. "You've always loved her more. And you've always expected me to be someone I'm not, someone I'll never be. I can't keep doing this anymore. I can't keep trying to earn your approval when you've already made it clear that it's impossible." There was a long pause. I could feel the tension in the air, like we were standing on the edge of a cliff, both of us waiting for the other to take the first step. Finally, my father spoke, his voice cold and controlled. "You're being unreasonable, Rebecca. We've done everything we can for you. Why are you making this about Mullen? You're the one causing the problems, not us." I felt my heart race. The blame was shifting again, and this time I wasn't going to let it slide. "No, Dad," I said, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and relief. "I'm not the one causing the problems. You are. You and Mom. You spent my entire life making me feel like I'm not good enough. And I've tried so hard to fix that, to be what you wanted me to be. But I can't do it anymore. I'm done. I'm done pretending that I'm happy with how things are. I'm done pretending that I can be part of your perfect little family when all I've ever been is a second choice. There was another pause. This time, my father didn't respond immediately. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end of the line, but he didn't speak. My mother, on the other hand, was quick to retort. "You've always been so dramatic, Rebecca," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You've always had to make everything about you. You've ruined your wedding, and now you're ruining our family." I could feel the anger boiling in me, but this time I wasn't afraid. I'm not ruining anything. I'm finally standing up for myself. I've been silent for too long, and I'm not going to let you make me feel guilty for wanting to be treated with the same love and respect that you've always given Mullen. My mother's voice wavered for just a moment. Why couldn't you just be happy for Mullen? Why couldn't you just let her have her moment? I let out a long breath, because it was never about her. It was about you not seeing me. It was about you making me feel like I didn't matter. I don't need your approval anymore. I've spent my whole life chasing it, but I'm done. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and then, finally, my father spoke, his voice low and resigned. "Maybe it's time for us to stop pretending, too." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of his words settle in my chest. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment where I stopped trying to fix things that couldn't be fixed. I had given up on the idea of the perfect family, and for the first time in my life, I felt a sense of peace. It hurt, yes, but it was also freeing. "I think you're right," I said softly. "I'm done trying to fix something that's already broken." And with that, I hung up the phone. I didn't feel relief, not at first. But as the minutes passed, the heaviness that had weighed on me for so long started to lift. It wasn't the happy ending I had imagined, but it was the ending I needed. And for the first time, I knew I could move on. Looking back on everything, I've learned that sometimes the hardest but most necessary thing is to let go of toxic relationships, even if they're family. You can spend your whole life trying to win people's approval, but you can't force someone to love you the way you need. Accepting that people may never change and that it's okay to walk away is a form of self-respect. You don't have to fit into anyone's mold, and it's okay to stop pretending for the sake of keeping peace. True freedom comes when you stop seeking validation from those who can't offer it and start living for yourself.